At Arlington's tomb of the unknown soldier, Sergeant Brandon Wells faces a heart-wrenching choice. Obey protocol or rescue a Vietnam vet's fallen Bronze Star for mockery. His daring act ignites a nationwide uproar. Dawn broke cold over Arlington National Cemetery. A thin mist curled around rows of white headstones, each marking a story left untold. At the center stood the tomb of the unknown soldier, its marble face glowing softly under a gray November sky. Sergeant Brandon Wells, 29 years old, a tomb guard of the 3rd United States Infantry Regiment, moved with perfect precision. 21 steps. Pause. Turn. 21 steps again. His polished boots struck the stone plaza, each click steady as a heartbeat. His blue dress uniform was flawless. White gloves crisp. Silver bayonet gleaming. M14 rifle balanced on his shoulder. To the crowd, families with coffee cups, school children with backpacks, veterans in faded caps, Brandon was a living monument, a symbol of honor for those who never returned. Beneath his disciplined exterior, Brandon carried a private burden. For years ago, in the dusty streets of Iraq, an improvised explosive device had ripped through his squad. His squad leader, Staff Sergeant Reggie Ford, had shoved Brandon out of the blast path, taking the full force himself. Brandon still heard Reggie's voice, calm amid the chaos, saying, "Keep them breathing, Wells. That's the job." The memory was a raw scar. Brandon had joined the tomb guard to honor men like Reggie, to stand for the nameless, whose stories were buried without ceremony. Each step he took felt heavier, as if his past marched beside him. The November air was sharp, leaves skittering across the plaza, their rustle mixing with the low murmur of the crowd. Brandon's eyes, trained to see everything and nothing, swept across the scene. A young girl waved a miniature American flag, her pigtails bouncing with each step. An elderly couple leaned into each other, faces etched with memory and loss. And near the velvet rope barrier stood a man, roughly 70, resting on a weathered cane. His denim jacket was faded, the stitching frayed. On one sleeve, a 1st Infantry Division patch, aged but unmistakable. A Vietnam War veteran. Brandon recognized him immediately. The man's face was worn, his expression distant, like someone staring into a jungle only he could still see. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy moments like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we've got another powerful story for you. His name was Walter Crane, known to a few as Walt, a former Army sergeant who had slogged through the thick, unforgiving terrain of Vietnam in 1968. Walt came home to a country that turned its back on his service. His Bronze Star and Purple Heart had stayed tucked in a drawer, too heavy, too painful to look at. He survived the ambush at Key Tam, but his best friend, Private Eli Navarro, did not. Eli earned the Bronze Star posthumously, dragging 2 wounded soldiers to safety under a curtain of gunfire, only to be cut down by a sniper's bullet. Walter had made a promise to Eli's mother, one he couldn't shake. He swore he'd bring the medal to the tomb of the unknowns one day, to honor not just Eli, but all those whose names were never spoken again. And now, 57 years later, he had come, not for closure, but driven by a quiet need he couldn't put into words. A need to know that Eli's sacrifice still mattered. Walter's arthritic fingers clutched the Bronze Star, its one shiny surface dull by time, but still impossibly heavy with meaning. He stood quietly at the barrier as the crowd's chatter faded into background noise. His cane slipped slightly on the slick stone beneath him. He reached to steady himself, and the medal fell. It happened fast, but in Walter's chest, time cracked open. The medal slipped from his grip and struck the plaza with a sharp, clean clink. The sound sliced through the morning hush like a blade. It skittered past the rope line, beyond reach, catching the dull light as it spun against the greystone. Walter froze. His breath caught in his throat. To him, the sound wasn't metal on stone. It was shell casings hitting jungle dirt. It was screams in the night. It was Eli's voice calling his name from deep inside Key Tam. The crowd turned. A teenager in a hoodie, earbuds slung around his neck, snickered. "Old guy dropped his shiny badge," he said. His friend elbowed him, chuckling. "Bet it's fake." A woman in a long coat and scarf snapped, "Show some respect." But no one stepped forward. Brandon saw it all. His jaw locked. The Bronze Star sat there, exposed, unguarded. Eli's courage, reduced to a joke. A sacrifice, left to be mocked. Protocol was clear. Tomb guards do not break formation. They do not speak. They do not flinch. Their job is ritual. Their loyalty, silence. Their discipline, absolute. But Brandon's mind flashed. To Iraq. To the smoke and fire. To the moment he disobeyed in order to pull a wounded private from a burning Humvee. He'd been reprimanded. Quietly. But later, his commanding officer, Reggie Ford, had placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Don't let them fade, Wells. Not one of them." Now, across the plaza, Walter began to bend. His knees groaned under the weight of time. His fingertips trembled inches above the metal. The teenager laughed louder. His voice cracked across the space like a slap. Brandon's gloved hand twitched. Leather creaked. He counted his steps. 19, 20, 21. Pause. Turn. The air shifted, like the moment before a storm breaks. Brandon's eyes locked on the fallen star. Its 5 points gleamed. A quiet beacon in a field of stone. He saw Walter's hunchback, the slump of his shoulders, the shame in his posture. He saw Eli Navarro, not the hero in the record, but the 19-year-old kid who had given everything and was now being kicked toward oblivion. Protocol said stay, but duty whispered something else. Brandon stepped off the mat. One step, then another. Deliberate, controlled, calm. The crowd gasped. A ripple of stunned silence rolled through the plaza, like wind before a storm. A child's voice whispered, "Mom, he's moving." Brandon Wells crossed a rope. His boots echoed in the hush. Each footfall a quiet rebellion. He reached the metal and knelt, movement precise, reverent. With gloved fingers, he lifted the bronze star from the stone. He wiped it gently, the dull bronze catching a glint of light. Then he turned. Walter's eyes had widened. His breath caught, a mix of disbelief and something deeper, relief, maybe, recognition. Brandon stepped forward, stopping just inches from a velvet rope. He extended the metal with both hands. His voice broke every rule. Low, steady, human. This belongs with you, Sergeant. It's not just metal, it's his courage. Walter's hands shook as he reached for it. "That's Eli's," he rasped, voice frayed by years of silence. He earned it saving lives at Key-Tam. I thought I'd lost him again. Tears welled in his weathered eyes, spilling quietly down his cheeks. "Thank you, son." Brandon held his gaze. Eyes steady, voice soft. "He's not lost, sir. None of them are." He raised his hand in a slow, crisp salute. The gesture carried weight no words ever could. 1,000 untold stories pressed into that moment. Then, without another word, Brandon turned. He crossed back over the rope, resumed his position, boots aligned, eyes forward, as if the world had not just shifted. The crowd stood frozen. Then slowly they began to clap, soft, reverent, a tribute, not to spectacle, but to something far older. Across the plaza, a young woman stood still, phone trembling in her hand. She had caught the entire moment from behind a pillar. The guard breaking formation, the kneel, the salute, the exchange. Her name was Tanya Rivera, 20 years old, a college student visiting D.C. on a field trip. She barely breathed as she typed the caption, "This is what America means." A tomb guard broke protocol to honor a Vietnam vet. Hashtag Tomb Guard Honor. She hit post. By noon, her video had over 300,000 views. By sunset, it was everywhere: CNN, YouTube, X, TikTok. The internet was on fire. This is why we honor our vets. He broke the rules for the right reason. That's what a real hero looks like. But not everyone agreed. A few voices pushed back. The guard dishonored the post. They're not there to play hero. Protocol exists for a reason. Still, veterans across the country began to rally. One by one, they posted photos of their own medals, bronze stars, purple hearts, silver stars, captioned with 2 words. Hashtag Tomb Guard Honor. A retired Marine who had served with Walter back in Nam, now 73 and limping, posted a grainy photo of them in uniform. That kid gave Walt his pride back. A Veterans of Foreign Wars post in Ohio shared the video, writing, "This is what service looks like." By nightfall, Brandon's quiet gesture had sparked a national conversation. One about sacrifice, about ritual, and about what happens when compassion challenges the rules. From the shadows of the Memorial Amphitheater, Colonel Raymond Bishop had watched it all, stone-faced, silent, unblinking, the guard stepping off the mat, crossing the rope, speaking, breaking formation, a violation of protocol, a breach of sacred tradition. At 10:47 a.m., Bishop pulled a small notepad from his coat pocket and began to write, pen scratching briskly across the page. Violation of ceremonial code. Recommend immediate disciplinary review. Colonel Bishop, a Desert Storm veteran, viewed the tomb of the unknown soldier as holy ground. Every movement of the guards, precise, rehearsed, inviolable. They were not men, they were memory given form. Brandon's act, no matter how noble, was a crack in that foundation. The colonel's jaw tightened. His pen tapped the pad again, twice. He watched Brandon return to his post, face unreadable, steps perfect, as if nothing had happened. But it had, and Bishop had seen it all. The chain of command moved fast. By that evening, a disciplinary hearing was scheduled at Fort Myer. Whispers spread through the regiment. Some called Brandon a hero, others called him reckless. Inside the barracks, Brandon sat alone. His uniform hung neatly on the locker door. A steaming cup of black coffee sat untouched on the table. The room was quiet, Spartan. Bunk beds, a metal locker, and a photo on the wall of his old squad from Iraq. At the center, Staff Sergeant Reggie Ford, smiling, arms draped over his shoulders. The door creaked open. Private April Monroe, another tomb guard, stepped in quietly, boots soft on the floor. She leaned against the wall, arms folded. "You knew you were going to catch heat for that, didn't you?" Brandon didn't look up. His eyes stayed on the photo. "Saw his face, April," he said quietly. "That medal wasn't just metal. It was his friend's life. I couldn't let it lie there." April exhaled, crossing the room. "Well, Bishop is livid. You touched the rope. You spoke. You broke sacred ground." She paused. "He might bench you for good." Brandon's lips twitched. Almost a smile. "Worth it," he said. "He carried that Bronze Star for over 50 years. We almost let it get kicked across the floor." April studied him for a long moment, then sat across from him. "You think about Iraq?" she asked. "Every step," Brandon replied. "The blast, the fire, Reggie's hands shoving him down, the silence that followed." Brandon still carried Reggie's dog tag. He wore it under the uniform. A talisman, a weight, a promise. "That vet today," he added, "looked like he carried the same thing. I couldn't let him lose it." April's voice softened. "They won't understand it at the top, but I do." In a low-cost motel just outside Arlington, Walter Crane sat on the edge of a creaky bed, the Bronze Star resting heavy in his palms. The room smelled faintly of old carpet and reheated coffee. Wallpaper peeled in the corners. The nightstand lamp flickered slightly. It was all he could afford, but he wasn't thinking about the room. Beside him, propped against a plastic cup of water, sat a faded photo, creased, sun-bleached. Him and Eli Navarro, grinning in their mud-streaked uniforms, arms slung around each other in the thick humidity of Vietnam. He hadn't looked at the photo in decades. Too painful. Too close. Now, with trembling fingers, Walter traced Eli's smile with the edge of his thumb. "You made it to the tomb, Eli," he whispered. "Someone saw you. Someone still cared." The television across from him played low. On screen, a shaky phone video of Sergeant Brandon Wells, kneeling, saluting, returning the medal. The voice of a news anchor cut in. "A tomb guard's unprecedented act of compassion has sparked debate nationwide. Tradition or humanity? We'll explore after the break." Walter's chest tightened. What had been a private pilgrimage Just between him, Eli, and the stone was now national news. A moment meant for silence, now replayed millions of times. He thought about the years after Vietnam, the protesters, the spitting, the long nights spent drinking just to forget, the star he kept hidden in a drawer, the shame that clung like fog. Eli's legacy was all he had left, proof that it all meant something. And today, on a cold morning in Arlington, one young soldier had reminded him. It still did. The next morning, Sergeant Brandon Wells stood at attention inside a narrow chamber at Fort Myer. His posture was flawless, his face unreadable, but his palms beneath the white gloves were damp. Across from him sat the disciplinary board. At the center, Colonel Raymond Bishop, jaw like granite, chest gleaming with medals. Flanking him, two other officers in full dress, ribbons thick, expressions neutral. The air was tight. Still, not a single camera, but the silence buzzed like a live wire. Bishop opened a leather folder and began to read. Sergeant Wells, on November 11th, at precisely 10:47 a.m., you deviated from ceremonial protocol during a watch at the tomb of the unknown soldier. You broke formation. You crossed the boundary rope. You engaged a civilian. You spoke publicly. Explain yourself. Brandon's voice was calm, measured. No stutter. No apology. I honor the soldier's sacrifice, sir. That Bronze Star belonged to Private Eli Navarro, awarded posthumously for heroism at Ketam. It slipped beyond the barrier. No one else moved. I couldn't let it be mocked. The tomb isn't just for the unknown. It's for every man and woman who served, living or dead. Bishop's eyes narrowed. His pen tapped the folder once. Twice. Your duty, Sergeant, is the ritual, not sentiment, not performance. The tomb demands perfection, not improvisation, not personal judgment. Brandon's voice remained steady. With respect, sir, my duty is to those we buried, and to the ones still walking, still carrying names no one else remembers. That veteran, he deserved better than silence and a laugh. Silence fell like a drop curtain. One of the officers, an older man with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons, cleared his throat. A retired colonel. Vietnam era. He spoke softly. Recommendation. 1 week suspension. Written statement of regret. Brandon didn't blink. I won't regret honoring a veteran, sir. Not now. Not ever. The room felt smaller suddenly. The walls closer. The charge heavier. Colonel Bishop leaned back in his chair. His eyes didn't leave Brandon's. He, too, had buried friends. He, too, carried names. But tradition was sacred. And this was a challenge. A crack in marble. Across town, Walter Crane sat stiffly in a metal chair at a local VFW post in Arlington. The room smelled of beer, old wood, and stories too long to retell. The walls were lined with flags, framed medals, and black and white photographs. Faces frozen in youth. The crowd had gathered, gray-haired veterans in worn jackets, some with canes, others with prosthetics. Mixed in were younger soldiers from Iraq and Afghanistan, nursing bottled beers and bruises of their own. Walter stood slowly. The Bronze Star was pinned to his chest now. Its weight didn't burden him. It steadied him. I know most of you don't know me, he began, voice dry but steady. But this, he tapped the metal lightly, this ain't just metal. A hush settled. This was Eli Navarro's. He was 19. Dragged 2 wounded men out of hell, took a bullet for it. He never got to come home. Walter paused, eyes glassy but fierce. Every kid we lost, every one of them is in this star. And that guard, Sergeant Wells, he didn't just pick it up off the ground. He picked me up. He picked Eli up. A beat of silence. Then cheers. Fists pounded tables. Chairs scraped. Someone whistled. Another shouted, "Give him a medal." A young Marine near the bar raised his phone and hit record. Moments later, the clip hit X. He broke the rules, but he lifted a brother. That's service. By nightfall, it had spread. Tanya Rivera's original video crossed 2 million views. Veterans from across the country began posting their own tributes. Photos of medals, snapshots of lost friends, and handwritten captions. This is why we served. Wells got it right. A 12-year-old girl from Ohio, whose father had deployed 3 times to Iraq, shared a watercolor she painted. Brandon kneeling, medal in hand, with the caption, "This is what heroes do." A former Vietnam chopper pilot shared a photo of his Bronze Star with a short message. Wells reminded us why we fought. A high school teacher in Texas asked her students to write essays on what happened at Arlington. One student wrote, "He broke the rules, but he fixed something bigger." And in Congress, during a Veterans Day address, a senator from Virginia said it plainly, "If we punish compassion, we dishonor the soldiers we claim to honor." Sergeant Brandon Wells showed that duty isn't just standing still. Sometimes it means stepping forward. The chamber erupted in applause, and the sound rippled from marble floors to newsroom studios. Alone in his office at Fort Myer, Colonel Raymond Bishop sat with the lights dimmed. His desk was cleared except for one object, his laptop. He clicked play again. The screen showed Sergeant Brandon Wells, captured in grainy phone footage, stepping off the mat, kneeling, lifting the fallen Bronze Star. He paused the video on Walter Crane's face. Eyes wide, tears fresh. Relief, pride, grief blurred into one expression. Bishop leaned back. He wasn't a stranger to loss. He had buried friends in the sands of Kuwait, carried names in his wallet that never made it home. He turned to the file on his desk. Wells, Brandon M. Exemplary service record. Purple Heart from Iraq. Commended for leadership. Volunteered for tomb guard duty. An honor fewer than 700 in history had held. Bishop rubbed his temples, then began to type. Recommend commendation for exceptional judgment under extraordinary circumstance. He didn't stop there. He clicked open a media file again and stared at the pause frame. Wells, saluting. Walter, holding the medal to his chest. Crowd standing. Something sacred in motion. 10 days later, Walter returned to Arlington. He walked slower this time, but his steps were proud. The crowd at the plaza shifted to let him through. Some saluted. Others just nodded quietly. A young boy offered him a tiny flag. Walter took it with a smile. Brandon stood at his post. 21 steps, pause, turn, 21 steps again. But there was something different in his eyes now. Not lighter, just clearer. At precisely 11 a.m., the ceremony began. A brigadier general, chest decorated like a mosaic, stepped forward. He invited Walter and Brandon to stand together at the center of the plaza. With special authorization, Brandon pinned a silver star for civilian courage onto Walter's jacket. A rare honor, one almost never given. Walter's hand clutched the Bronze Star close. "For Eli," he said, voice cracking. Brandon nodded. He knelt once more and placed a single white rose at the foot of the tomb. "For all of them," he said quietly. The crowd stood, hands over hearts. Some wept. Some simply breathed differently. In the front row, Tanya Rivera lowered her phone. This moment didn't need to go online. Behind her, an elderly Vietnam vet raised a trembling salute. His lips barely moved, but the words were clear. "Thank you." Back at the motel, Walter Crane hung the Bronze Star next to his Purple Heart. The medals caught a shaft of afternoon light that slipped through the dusty blinds. He stared at them for a long time. Beside them, he taped the old photo of him and Eli Navarro, young, grinning, soaked in sweat and jungle mud, eyes too alive to have known what was coming. Walter picked up a pen and a hotel notepad. He began to write. To Sergeant Wells, you gave an old man his friend back. You gave America its soul. Don't stop. He folded the paper, slipped it into an envelope, but never mailed it. That night, he fell asleep with the television still on. Muted news footage played quietly. Brandon's face filled the screen, boots clicking in perfect cadence, rifle gleaming, eyes forward. The anchor's voice quoted a post gone viral. The tomb guard didn't break tradition. He built it. Across the city, in a quiet apartment above a metro line, Brandon Wells opened a drawer. Inside were a folded flag, Reggie Ford's dog tag, and a new letter, freshly stamped and official. Commendation for valor, Arlington National Command. He set the letter down, fingers resting lightly on it. Another weight, but one he'd carry. Out the window, the DC skyline shimmered. He stood in silence for a moment, as if listening. Somewhere, Reggie was watching, and smiling. For months later, a Vietnam veteran from California visited the tomb. He posted a photo of Brandon walking the mat, his silhouette dark and perfect against the marble's bright shine. He moved for one of us. That's enough. The caption read, "The tomb doesn't just hold the unknown. It holds us all." That spring, Walter Crane passed away peacefully in his sleep, the Bronze Star still resting in his hands. At his funeral in a quiet Virginia chapel, Brandon stood in full dress blues, silent, still. As the haunting notes of taps floated through the space, he raised a final salute. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was a promise. Eli, Walter, Reggie, never forgotten. Weeks later, at Arlington, a young boy stood beside his mother, watching Brandon patrol. He tugged her sleeve and asked, "Why does he stand so still?" She knelt beside him, voice soft. "Because he only moves when it matters, sweetheart. And when he does, the whole world notices." Brandon heard them. His face didn't change. His steps didn't falter. But deep inside, he felt it, the weight of valor, light as a rose, heavy as a nation's memory. He marched on, 21 steps, carrying the past, guarding the future. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of sacrifice, honor, or someone you miss, don't just watch, share it. Let others feel what you just felt. Tap the like button to show your respect. Help this story reach as many hearts as possible by sharing it with friends, family, and fellow patriots. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Grateful Stories HQ for more powerful, true-to-life stories that honor courage, memory, and humanity. We don't just tell stories here. We carry them.